Take your Bibles, if you would. Let me turn this one on here, okay? Please, and turn to Proverbs chapter 16. Proverbs chapter 16. Tonight, we are talking about your heart. We are talking about your relationship with God. We are talking about your relationship with yourself. We are talking about your relationship with your husband and your wife and your children. We are talking about every single human relationship you have. That's quite a topic, is it not? You know, and it's because we're talking about money. And money affects, it connected to all of that. It is just all connected. You just can't help it. It's just all connected to your money. Now, you've heard the phrase, a penny saved is a penny for your thought. And here's the origin of that. I came across it this week, okay? And it's this. The saying is from a time when the British penny was actually worth a significant sum. In 1522, Sir Thomas More wrote in the four last things, it often happened that the very face showeth the mind, is written back in that time, walking a pilgrim in such a way that other folks shortly say to them, a penny for your thought. But actually a penny was quite a bit of money. And so in other words, what they're saying is, I am willing to pay a lot to know what you're thinking. Isn't that true? You ever, back before The Rock, for Karen and I, The Rock came into our marriage about 7 or 8 years into our marriage. And it revolutionized our marriage. Many of you have heard me talk about it before, but the idea of The Rock and how you communicate. Everybody know that? Anybody not know what I'm talking about? Anybody not know what I'm talking about when I say The Rock? Raise your hand. Go ahead. Okay, The Rock. Okay, The Rock. It's not an actor or anything, okay? The Rock is actually, it's a physical rock. We were at a couples conference at the Wilds, I guess 7 or 8, maybe 9 years into our marriage. I'm not married so long, I don't know exactly, but it's a time into our marriage. And he explained how you can communicate and talk about anything in your marriage if you use The Rock. And that was helpful to Karen and I because we would not communicate as well as we should have. Because, when one party said to the other, you're doing this, well, you either have to agree with them or tell them they're wrong. And I learned very early in my marriage that when you tell your wife she's wrong, it can result in a very long evening or a very cold night. So you got to be very careful about that. So we never could figure out how to communicate well as we should have. So we learned a couple of things. We learned the Rock I have in one of my office. It has multiple different sides to it. And so when a person says from my side of the rock, what they simply mean is, this is what I am seeing, but I'm acknowledging that you're seeing things I don't see, but I'm also acknowledging that there are some things that neither one of us see, okay? And that's a very key dynamic there, okay? Whenever you're talking about something, you're telling you what you think about it, and the other person telling you what you think about it, but do you really think that whoever you're talking to and whatever you're talking about, do you actually think for a moment that both of you, between the two of you, you have all the knowledge in the world about whatever you're talking about? Of course you don't. You don't know everything. And you have limitations, okay? You don't know everything. So you're talking that through, okay? And The Rock was invaluable to our marriage in helping it move forward as we learn to communicate, okay? And to talk things through. Now, so the idea here of a penny for your thought is the idea that it's really valuable that you care about what people think so much you're willing to pay big bucks to find it out, okay? Now, I say that to say this. How we view money is reflective of what we think is important to us. At our house, for example, we just got finished building the Kitty Hawk Christmas box, or whatever it's called, small shed, okay, for the Kitty Hawk Christmas land stuff. I moved everything into it this week, and I think I may not have built it big enough. I'm not sure. But anyhow, it's the biggest it's going to get. And because in our household, that's important to us. It's not important to you, maybe, and that's fine. You can go ahead and go fishing if you want to, or go hunting, or do whatever else you want to do in your leisure time, whatever works, floats your boat. But we all have our different things, okay? So tonight, I want to talk to you about your money. Okay, look at Proverbs chapter 16, if you would, please, and look at verse number 16. How much better is it to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding, rather to be chosen, and to get understanding, rather to be chosen, that is, understanding is rather to be chosen, than for silver. Now he's saying here, the most important thing is wisdom and understanding. And he's equating it with money. Now, you might think that's a weird thing to talk about, to start with, when you're talking about the how to handle and how to view money, if you're saying money is really important. Well, I'm using this verse because I want you to understand that the money you have, okay, is valuable, but it's more important that you have wisdom. I know people, for example, you know when everything went underwater here a number of years ago with the housing market? Okay, a lot of people lost their house. I knew people who had been paying on the same house for 30 years. And when the market went south in 2008, they were underwater. Now, how can you pay on a house for 30 years with a 30-year mortgage and be underwater when the value of the house goes down? How is that possible? Anybody know? Do what? Refinancing, yes, yes. Refinancing over and over and over and over again. Thinking for a moment that, if I just consolidated all my bills, I would solve my problem, okay? And Dave Ramsey is really good about this. He acknowledges the fact that all you're doing when you do that is to facilitate you getting further into debt because usually there's a challenge with the economic flow in your life if you have to keep refinancing your house to start with. And so you basically just digging a bigger hole. Dave Ramsey's comment is, and I'm not original with me, I think it's a very good comment, in order to get out of a hole financially, you have to first stop digging. Okay? If you keep digging, you're never going to get out of the hole. Okay? So it's more important to be wise than to have money. How many people have you heard of, maybe you've read about, who've won maybe at the lottery or gotten some windfall amount? Maybe in your life, maybe you got a windfall. You say, well, I never got a windfall. Well, maybe an extra $100 one time from some sort, or maybe an extra 50 or something. And then you turn around in the day or two and say, well, where did that money go? It's gone. You ever have that happen? I'm sure you haven't, but there are other people who have had that happen. Or you have some money in your wallet or your pocketbook, and then you turn around and say, what happened to that? Where did that go? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, and again, not you, but the person next to you maybe has that problem. Okay, I think we've all had the problem maybe sometime. I think my wife's the only one maybe who's never had that problem. She has birthday money from 12 years ago. The woman is, if she ever got put in charge of the finances of the church, we would have plenty of money because we wouldn't spend anything. But anyhow, but the point is that, that you have to be wise when it comes to your money. Now, what I did this week is I went through all the verses in the book of Proverbs that talk about money. It was quite enlightening, quite inspiring, quite challenging, and at times quite a bit convicting, okay? And then I came to Proverbs 31, which we won't come to right this, we'll be there eventually. And I found out that when you study the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31, you actually have a summary of all what the first 30 chapters have said about finances, about many things, but about finances, okay? So when we get there in a moment or two, after we take an excursion trip over to 1 Timothy in a moment, then we're going to learn 5 principles to help us understand money and the wisdom that it requires of us, okay? But before we go there, let me ask you to turn to the book of 1 Timothy. Hold your place in Proverbs, or just we'll be back, you'll find it. We'll be back in Proverbs in a few moments. At least we hope we will, okay? So let's turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6, okay? One of the challenging things I have learned in my own life, I don't know how it was when you were growing up. I got help to learn how to drive and how to ride a bike, but I got more help on how to ride a bike in my upbringing years than I ever did about finances, okay? I got nobody ever talked to me about finances. And so I graduated from high school, and after my junior year, I went off to Tennessee Temple University. I'm working 40 to 60 hours a week. I'm going taking a full load of classes and living in the dorm for the first time away from home, learning why I should never actually iron clothes, because when I iron them, I ruin them. And so so I was going through that, and I could never figure out how to handle the money. And back then, all the banking was free, and so I would mess up an account just so badly until I simply had to leave the bank and go to this was before online banking, before all of that, and I was, again, working 40, 60 hours a week at a job and full-time in school and studying and trying to sleep a few hours a night. And so I would mess it up so much, and then just give me another account, and you go to another bank. And you can only do it so many times, and then eventually you got to figure out how it works. Now, if you're so, well, I never had that problem. Well, you're just such a smart person because you were trained properly, okay? But before you get a high horse about your background, do you remember this? Everything you know, you've been taught or you've learned from somebody else, okay? You're not a brainiac when it comes to money because you were born a brainiac about money or whatever else it might be, okay? So don't get on your high horse about this and think about other people that somehow you're like better than everybody else. But the reality is we all have to learn to handle money wisely, okay? Now, with that in mind, I have learned them since then, but those first couple of years were really challenging going through Bible college and, again, that whole process. Now, with that said, let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 6, okay? 1 Timothy 6 gives us a setting that we need to keep in mind, okay? Now, I want to talk about two things here, just to give you, if you want to write, this is not going to appear on the screen, it's not on your outline, and I'll give this to you free of charge, and will not charge you an extra commission tonight for this. But in verses 9 and 10, you see a danger when it comes to money. And then in verses 17 through 19, you see a challenge when it comes to money. I just want to highlight this for your consideration tonight, because we live in a strange time, okay? We live in a strange time. Not only politically, but physically with the COVID thing, and then economically. This is a strange world we live in, is it not? And you say, how's it all going to work out? I don't know. But what I do know is that God is in control. And so I'm not anxious about it. I will suggest to you, by the way, I was at a meeting one time, just recently, last year, early this year sometimes, and someone was sharing, they'd been to an executive seminar, a seminar for executives, for uppity-ups in corporations and so forth. And in this uppity-up corporation meeting, or training session for uppity-ups in business, they challenged the uppity-ups to limit themselves to about 5 minutes of news a day. To start the day off, find out if there's still, if the world is still turning on its axis, and make sure that, there's nothing huge done. We haven't been annexed by Canada or something, or whatever. The country's still running. Get the basic highlights, and then they suggest, if you do social media, that you go on social media for 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes of news and 5 minutes of social media, then you just cut all that off and go on with your life for the rest of the day. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. And you do your own little thing about that, but I think you have to be so careful to get so worked up, because you do realize when you get worked up 12 times or 15 times a day over the same thing, that by the time you go to bed at night, nothing's actually changed, okay? So you need to think about that as you deal with all the craziness in the world. But when it comes to money, let's look at this danger. Look at verse 9, okay? 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 9. But they that will be rich. Now, the phrase will be rich is not speaking about the fact that rich people are evil, okay? Because, it's not true. Rich people are not evil. There are some very godly rich people. There are some very godly poor people. And there are some very wicked rich people. There are very wicked poor people. But here is that they that will be rich, in other words, your desire is acquiring wealth. I want you to be careful about that, okay? There's nothing wrong, okay, that with wanting to make wise investments, but be careful with that desire. Now, the predicate of all this is verses 6 through 8. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. You do realize that when you die, you will die broke. Everybody in here that dies, that when we die, we will die broke. Nobody dies having a lot of stuff. Because the moment you die, it's all somebody else's. Okay? That's one of the ways I'm using my attic for that. All the junk I'm not sure what to do with, I'm throwing it up in the attic, and when I'm dead, the kids can worry about it. I ain't going to think of that. I put it up there. I don't think about it again. It's up there when I'm gone. They get something to do to pass the time of day. And but the idea is you leave it all. Okay. Look at verse 8. And having food and raiment, let us therefore be content. So the idea of being content doesn't mean you can't be successful financially, but be content. Okay. But then it will be rich, fall into a temptation. What? And a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lust. Now that is true. People who are obsessed with money have made some of when you make a decision based upon money, you are making the decision based upon the least reliable and least value thing in the world. Now, I'm not saying that money isn't part of it, okay? For example, you've got to decide if you can buy something. Well, do I have the money to do that? If God is leading you to take a job or take a ministry or whatever, you got to figure out how are you going to live? How does God want you? Now, sometimes God wants you just to go and trust Him. That's what happened when we came out here. When we came out here, there was no financial backing. There was no ministry saying, we're going to pay you a salary for 6 months or a year or 2 years. There was nothing. So sometimes we got paid, sometimes we didn't, but of course the Lord provided. And that was a very unique thing. But the idea here is that you got to be careful to watch this. Look at verse 10. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which some covet after, have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. They just ruin themselves and creating great suffering and pain because of their attitude towards money. Now, that's the danger. The danger is you become obsessed with it, and it paralyzes you, and it destroys you. Okay? Now, what's the challenge? Look at verse 17. Charge them that are rich in this world. And by the way, I know you don't like this, but you do realize that everybody in this room is rich. You say, I'm not rich. Well, I know you're not rich. It's because who you're comparing yourself to. But I don't know anybody in this room, because if I did, we would do our best to help meet that need, who is questioning whether or not you're going to have food to eat tomorrow morning. I don't think anybody in this room is that way. And if you are, then you need to be seeing me or one of the deacons so we can help you. Okay? And most of us are not under the danger of being kicked out of our house tomorrow morning or the power being cut off. For most, I think, in this room. Not to everybody, but now you can find somebody that you're a lot richer than they are, okay? Now watch this. That they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches. He said, trust in certain riches. I can't trust my money. I can't trust my 401k. I can't trust my retirement plan. I can't even trust Social Security. I can't do that. Watch it. But in the living God, who giveth us richly all things to enjoy. Everything I have comes from me. I've got to trust Him with this stuff, okay? Doesn't mean I don't go to work tomorrow. Doesn't mean I say, I'm not going to go to work. I'm just going to trust God to meet my need. Now, that's called laziness and starvation that you choose. Okay? But the idea is we're trusting God. Verse 18. That they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. Okay? Okay? Laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. In other words, I want to handle my life, my physical life, in light of my eternal life, because this is simply not going to last forever. I was listening to a message this week, as I often try to do. I try to listen to a couple of messages if I have time, on whatever message I'm preaching on, to hear how other men have treated the topic or the passage may be. And I can learn a lot from that. Of course, I study books and other things. I pray about it, all the rest of it too. So, and this one author made this comment, and he said, there was a man was preaching, and these two college students came up. They said, we've surrendered to go to the mission field. And our parents, they went to a prestigious college, and they were in the midst of their college education, and their parents were appalled. No. Well, you've had a religious experience. And they said this, now before you go to the mission field, do this. And they were talking to their pastor, says, get your master's degree, and then work a few years and get some work experience, save up a nest egg, get some financial security, and then you can go to the mission field. And they asked the pastor, said, well, what should I tell my parents about this? She says, well, tell your parents that they're living on a ball that's whizzing through the universe at a rapid speed, and one day, for all of us, a trap door is going to open up, and we're going to fall through it. And we never know when the trap door is going to open up. It's called death. And we have no control. We cannot determine ourselves when that's going to happen. What kind of security do you really think your bank account is going to give you? It doesn't give you any security. Not at all. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't save, you shouldn't be wise. I'm not saying that. You shouldn't have a retirement plan. I'm just saying that can't be your security. Okay? Now, in light of that, let me ask you to turn to Proverbs 31. Because in Proverbs 31, we have this wise woman. And women are very wise when it comes to money. Okay, it's been my experience in my marriage and in my life and in my counseling that many, not always, but many times, the wife is much better with finances than the husband is. Not always. So in your case, if it's different, then it's different. There's no problem. Don't worry about it. Okay, you can't be good at everything. Okay, but the idea here of the virtuous woman. Now, some Bible scholars view this as a picture, as a metaphor, the virtuous woman for wisdom. But I think it's speaking about a real wife and the qualities of a godly woman. Now, I want to tell you a story about money that I heard this week that's quite unique. Robert Cain was disciplined by his church. Robert Cain, he was disciplined over greed. He was disciplined because of his greed. That's interesting. You ever thought about disciplining a church member because of greed? Do you think you're a greedy person? Do you think you're a greedy person? Well, this happened in 1635, okay? And Robert went to this church. I think it's up in Boston somewhere. I'm not sure where it was at. Maybe not Boston, but someplace in the Northeast. And he was disciplined for greed. And why? Because he was charging 6% interest of profit on what he was selling. And the church leaders had determined before this that nobody should make more than 4%. Anything more than 4% was, in fact, being greedy. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's the market value for the day, but it was a body of believers, and he knew about it ahead of time. He knew that body of believers that said, you know what? It is important for us as Christians to guard our greediness. Now, if you sell products for more than a 4% profit, I'm not saying you're being greedy. I'm saying in 1635, in this environment, in that culture, I don't think it was a seasonal culture. I don't think it was a vacation resort. A lot of other things, okay? But you have to commend the fact that the church was willing to proactively articulate the need to be careful with greed. Now, give yourself a test to ask yourself, maybe a test. I heard this test this week, and it was challenged to my heart, and that is this. Don't raise your hand, okay? Don't raise your hand. Don't say anything. Okay. But just think for a moment. Do you tithe or give systematically to the ministry in the local church? Do you do that? Now, just think about that for a moment, okay? Now, here's the question I was challenged with. Is the way you spend the rest of your money and the way you live your life, is it at all put in an inconvenient place because of how much you give? In other words, the speaker was saying, does your giving really cost you anything? Or are you simply giving? I'm giving 10%. Yes, but when a person makes a certain amount of money, 10% requires no sacrifice. And the author I was listening to just made the comment, says, is our giving ever sacrificial? Okay? And maybe an indication of greed in our heart is when we're unwilling to be inconvenienced by giving of what we have to somebody else. Now, our Christmas offering starts Sunday, and our goal in our Christmas offering is multiple faceted, but one of the ways is we're going to try to help some people during this difficult time with our Christmas offering, to try to help them out as people that we know that have needs, okay? We have to be careful about that, okay? Now, with that said, now that some of you are looking at me like, I don't know if I like that. Okay, well, I'm not sure if I like it either when I heard it, because if you're like I am, I've budgeted my regular giving. We have a family budget, and it's in there. But are there ever times that I should alter my budget, okay, for that time and be put out to help somebody else in need? I won't charge you for that. That's free tonight, okay, to make you feel uncomfortable about your giving. Okay, but anyhow, look at Proverbs 31, okay? Look at verse number 10, all right? Who can find a virtuous woman, a woman that is valuable, a woman that is credible? And what follows here is an acrostic with these different truths being laid out with different letters of the Hebrew alphabet. In other words, in the English alphabet, it would be one verse would begin with A, the next thought would begin with B, and C, and D, and E. Do you know why they did that, by the way, in the Hebrew Old Testament? Do you know why they did the acrostics letter-wise? Any guesses? To help you memorize them. One of the reasons. Help you memorize it, okay? A, B, C, because that A, B, C, D in Hebrew language, but the subsequent letters, okay? So they're trying to convey this thought here, okay? Now, I'm going to give you 5 things to write down, okay? So I don't think we'll finish all this tonight, but so if you come back next week, I might be a surprise, but I'd be glad if you come back next week after hearing what you've heard so far tonight. But I want to talk to you about this when it comes to money. First of all, thinking reliably. Okay, this is all about how we think, okay? And we're going to talk about thinking reliably. And the second, thinking diligently. And then thinking preventively. And thinking, number 4, generously. And then thinking faithfully. It's all tied into a penny for your thought. I want to encourage you to challenge your thinking about your money, okay? I want you to think about it, okay? I want whatever conclusion you come to become because of Scripture and because God has directed your thinking, okay? Because how you handle your money is very, very critical. Now, in verses 11 and 12, you have this challenge of thinking reliably, okay? Look at verse 11. The heart of her husband doeth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. Now, this is somebody who is reliable. I don't want you to get hung up on the word she, to think that this principle is only for wives, only for women. The application here, of course, it's true for all of us. We have to think reliably, okay? Are we reliable, okay, in 2 things? Are we reliable in the duty in which we perform? In verse 11, the heart of her husband doth safely trust in her. Does he have no need of spoil? So remember, in this culture, the women were very much responsible for the domestic household. And so when the husband would go out and do things that he would do, and then she would take care of the stuff in the household. Maybe a word pitch to help you see this is if you're accustomed to seeing movies of the Old West, where the guy goes out and is working the back 40, whatever, and the woman gets up in the morning and she cooks, and then he goes off to work, and then she makes butter, and she makes clothes, and she tends a small garden there for the family. She cans. She does all that stuff. Why? So when he gets back off the back 40 in the afternoon or the evening, he then had this food, and they can live as a family. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to do that at your household, but that's the mindset here. It's not a sexist thing here, but that's how the culture was set up, okay? All right. So what he's saying is that this woman is thinking reliably. He doesn't worry about her doing her part. Just have to worry about going to the back 40, if you would, and coming back and then having to can some beans or whatever and cook dinner, not because his wife is sick, but because she's been sitting by the dock of the bay watching the tide roll away and not doing her job, okay? And so we have to be careful that we are reliable, that people that are counting on us, that we are reliable, that we show up, okay? That we're reliable in fulfilling those duties. Not only that in verse 11, but reliable in the sense that we keep doing them. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. So he is confident in her reliability today, but he has no doubt that she's going to be as reliable 10 years from now or 20 years from now as she is right now. Now again, we're not talking about productivity, that she'll be just as productive at 90 as she was at 30. It wasn't that idea, but the idea that she is faithful at it, that she is reliable, rather. She's always going to show up. And when it comes to money, those who are counting on us need to always know that we're going to show up. They want to be reliable. We're not going to do something stupid, okay? Or something foolish. I heard a true story. Dr. Lucitel tells a story of a man who, without talking to his wife, risked their whole retirement on a scheme that went south. Now, you know, that's just not wise. That's not thinking reliably, okay? Okay? It's not how much money you have, okay? But it's the fact that the people that are interacting with you about it can rely upon you to be there. A couple of verses to write down. Proverbs 10:50. What I did is I went through Proverbs, looked at all these different verses, then I had a list of verses and thoughts from, not all the verses, but some of the verses. Then I went through and looked at this passage. I said, well, this like is a summary of all of this. But Proverbs 10:15 says, the rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. Now, you have to understand when it says the rich man's wealth is his strong city. Remember, in those days, it was in that culture, in that land, it was impossible to have a strong city without walls, without boundaries, without things that you knew were going to be there at nighttime when you all came inside the city and were protected. Okay? Proverbs 18:11 says, the rich man's wealth is his strong city, and there's a high wall in his own conceit. Now, what he's making, we'll talk about some other verses in a moment that may give the dimension of this, but the idea here is that a rich man relies upon the security of his money. Now, we have to be careful and understand that that is true. When I'm reliable with my money, that I create a level of security in my household when I'm handling it properly and reliably, okay? Now, my confidence isn't in it. My confidence is not in the balance of my savings account or my 401k or my investment. That's not where my confidence is, but I need to be reliable. My confidence is in the Lord, okay? But as I'm handling my finances, I've got to be reliable and be doing the stuff I'm supposed to be doing the right way, okay? Are we doing that? The second thing is we have to think diligently. And in verses 13 through 16, he talks about that, okay? The diligent effort of this very godly woman. Look at verse 13. She seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ship. She bringeth her food from afar, using word picture to denote her diligence. Verse 15. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. Okay? Verse 16, for this last part of this section. She considereth a field and buyeth it, and with the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. Now what you see here in verses 13 to 16 is a diligence, okay? Now, we learn from Proverbs 10:15 and Proverbs 18:11 and from verses 11 and 12 that thinking reliably that money can offer some human protection on a human level. But I have to be careful as I do that I understand that God's plan for me with whatever money He gives me is to be diligent about this, okay? Now notice this lady, she did a couple of things. First of all, she was willing in verses 13 and 14. She's willing to work. She's willing to do what has to be done. She's a willing worker. Second, letter B, she's a sacrificial worker. Look at verse 15. She rises up when it's still night, and so she is sacrificing. And then in verse 16, she is wise. So she is willing, she is sacrificial, and in fact, she is wise, okay? Now, the idea here is that a diligent person has to be willing to work hard and to sacrifice and to be wise in how they handle their money. That's God's plan for us. That's God's requirement to us, okay? So we want to think reliably, we want to think diligently, and then the final one, which we're going to touch on tonight, and then we'll maybe advance it a bit more next week and then finish the last two as we round the curve here. But number 3 is we have to think preventively, okay? I want to challenge you about this, about preventing problems down the road. I want to encourage you that how you handle your finances today will affect all of your tomorrows, okay? We're just going to read the verses, and then we'll have to land the plane here. We'll come back on it, because I want to talk to you about some other things when we have time next week. But look at verse 17. She girded up her loins with strength, and strengthened her arms. She perceived that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the staff. Now those verses talk about her acting in a preventative way to prevent things from going south, okay? Now we might call that, in a sense, saving. The idea here in verse 17 is that she girdeth her loins with strength and strengtheneth her arms. So she makes sure that she takes care of herself. She's preventative in the fact that she's taking care of herself and making sure she can do the job she's called to do. When it says she strengthens her arms, she makes sure that she takes care of herself. If I'm going to be a wise steward and think wise about money, I have to take care of myself as I attempt to work my life and fulfill my obligations and handle whatever God gives me, okay? And next week we'll talk more about this preventative step and then deal with the last two, generosity and faithfulness.